So welcome to the Farringdon Ward Club monthly drinks here at the Rising Sun in Castle Lane, and we're here every second Tuesday of the month from 6, and we have a guest speaker each month. We no pressure. I mean, we must have had short trousers when we met, 'cause it's 40 years ago. Yeah, you can tell who the funny one. Nappies. Thank you, Andrew. We have had some incredible speakers, and Justin is an incredible individual when you look at what he's done. And as you know, I can't read or write properly, and it's my fault that the first notice went out saying he was from the Institute of Perfection. But he is a very precise individual, and he's actually from the Institute of Reflection, which he founded. So it's going to follow the normal format of Justin talking to you, me picking up on a couple of things, and then it's your turn. So Justin, over to you.
That's very, very kind. And I'm very relieved actually, because I haven't seen any invitation notice, and I was told by David rather en passant that this was going to be about the Institute of Perfection, you see. And I thought, well, my God, everybody's going to come along with their sort of projectiles ready and sort of chuck something at this gonk who thinks he's so important. Anyway, thank you very much for putting my mind at rest, David. It is the Institute of Reflection, but I'm going to start on a couple of notes that are, as it were, rather removed from something so esoteric as how we think, simply on the grounds that I want to put, it's defensive really, so that I give the impression that I've actually come from the real world, the world where events actually happen, and that is really where I came across, or David came across me. And so I'm going to start with a little anecdote about the book, which is on sale, or you can actually get it for free on the Institute. But it's not what you might suppose. And so here's a little anecdote of, because I used to run the European Atlantic Group, which is now being very ably looked after by David. And there was, I mean, the thrills and spills of what can happen in real life are the sort of things that leave someone, make someone go scurrying towards the quiet solitudes and sanctuaries where you can get some peace and do some reflection. But here was one. We had at this group, which was a political group, the Commander-in-Chief of the British Army coming, who at the time was Sir Michael Jackson. And one reason why he was able or wanted to come to us was because he just had a book published, and this is always a good thing. If some celebrity has a book, they're delighted to find an audience, you see. And so, you know, duly we had the 200 people or so, which was the normal, about 180, I think, in the in and out club, and got this message from the publisher at the last moment that they were terribly sorry, but the books that we were supposed to be distributing hadn't come. And of course you can imagine the sort of red face, the anger of the general, so to speak. And I was in a position, so I thought, to sort of, you know, to soften the blow and to reassure him. And I said to him, and it was actually true, that he wasn't to worry, because we had another book. He was looking at me as if I'm mad. A lot of people do, but never mind. I said, yes, you see, we as a group published the pop singer Michael Jackson. And no one will notice the difference if we sell the book, you see. And I thought this was going to be the best moment we ever had in the group. It was going to produce laughter, it was going to be fun. And he turned to me, and because there are ladies present, I will not use the precise words he used, but basically, I hate that, etc., etc., etc. And we weren't able to do it. So tonight, instead of the book that is on the Institute of Reflection, I've got the book that we wrote about that group. So now you can understand in a way that, you know, these little mishaps can be turned to advantage. The book that's on the website is not really ready for publication, because we are in the process of doing a huge spring clean. It's all changed. I mean, if you look at the website tomorrow morning, you'll see a different one than you will next week, because we migrated it all so that it's more, shall we say, user-friendly for the sort of butterfly attention age. But now let's start looking at why I actually think, from a background that is really quite in the real world, why I think reflection is a very important thing. Now, we all know what reflection is. We don't have to tell you what the definition is. We all do it. But I'm going to say a few things about society, and I'm going to start with the idea that there are some things we know that we forget about, some things that are important, and we don't actually give them the importance that they require because we're so familiar with them. And reflection comes into this category. And so I'm going to have another anecdote for you before I sort of launch into why reflection is important. And I'm going to bracket together two very disparate figures. The poet Shelley, who wrote, you know, the poets are the unseen legislators of the future, and an actor who some of you may have heard of called Michael Wade, who was diagnosed with ineradicable cancer in the year 2000. And he's still alive and well, and he's sort of full of beans, and he didn't let it get to him. Now, what have these two figures got in common? And that's this. There is something that's going on in our heads, in our thinking, in our reactions to what happens in the real world, that is to do with the way we think. But we don't talk about it, we don't sit back, we don't analyse what it is. And then what we find in life is that we're dealing with an enormous number of symptoms, and we don't look at the cause of what's actually behind the problems we get. Now, there are problems in society. I don't have to sort of mention all of these to you, but I mean, I'll do a little plug for David. I hear he's written a musical on woke, and we're all, I suspect, I don't know, but there are people who don't quite feel the same way, but we all see woke as a little bit of a problem. I mean, these people are so worried about so many things that in the previous generation nobody cared about. But you can go on about this. Look at the problems there are in society at the moment. I mean, do we know that there were, in the last 2 years, the world over, 62 elections, and only one, and it happened to be, you wouldn't have guessed this, I'll tell you afterwards, every single one turned up, turfed out whatever was the government in power. It turns out that this was, whether they were right or left, people were actually, should we just say, of a grumpy disposition. They wanted to attack. It's like that sort of hippie in the 1960s who had a placard saying, what's ever up, let's get down. Now, people have got this little sort of weevil in their sort of brain. Actually, whoever is up there, there's something wrong with them. But it goes on, doesn't it? I mean, we all know about the cancel culture. We all are intolerant of people who don't want to think the way we think. Now, that's another symptom, isn't it? Because a lot of people don't think the way we happen to think. And actually, when we don't want to listen too carefully to what it is that they're saying and why they're saying it, we are constantly jousting with the person who comes up with the prejudice that we don't like. Now, we all know this. We can go on, you know. There are lots of things that we forget in life because we're just so familiar with them, and a lot of them were Victorian saws and sayings. Look before you leap, you know, be grateful for the blessings you're given every day. We say grace, but we don't think about it. But one of the points about reflection is in this category of things that we don't take too seriously, and we ought to, because they'll make a big difference to our life. And half the things I've been talking about, the cancel culture, the prejudice, the intolerance, half of the things that get us so hot under the collar, if we sit back quietly and reflect, you know, I won't say they'll dissipate completely, but there'll be lessons. And we'll be able to think more quietly and more carefully about how to do and react to what we have going on around us. Now, I'm going to just read one or two statements that are, I mean, this wonderful AI has produced statements that one has made, you know, in the course of articles. That it's the mark of a civilized person in a situation that is not too fraught. I mean, reflection's no good if you've just got to go over the top and you're firing at some sort of Huns who are sort of using a machine gun at you. But when you have the opportunity, that if in a situation isn't too fraught, that you make time to reflect. And the more one does it, the better one gets, and it's a habit. And then one's whole way of life can be transformed. Now, that's a big thing, isn't it? So let's just transforming one's life. Now, I was put onto this in a way because when I was a lot younger, I actually went, sorry if I say this in so sober looking a crowd, but one or two people might remember the days of the hippies. Well, I went and actually on the way to India, I met the Maharishi, and he talked to me for about 20 minutes, and actually I didn't understand a word he was saying, because actually he wasn't speaking in my language, but you did get the impression that this was a profound thinker. And the impression of this stayed with me. And it's the sort of thing that I'm talking about that goes behind our everyday thinking. Something actually goes in. Now, what had happened, George Harrison, the Beatle, he goes out to Rishikesh, meets the Maharishi, and you know what? Meditation is extraordinary this when you look back on it, but it's taken for granted like so many things that we don't challenge in our heads, which we ought to do, because if we challenge them, we can think more carefully about why we have the prejudices. So John Lennon and George Harrison, meditation, it became a whole way of life. It actually colonized the space in our heads that we would be normally using to think for ourselves. I mean, meditation, if you're going to go back to Marcus Aurelius, or you're going to look at some of the great people who are reflectors, penseurs, you know, you can think of so many major Western figures who've been writing reflections about reflections, but we have somehow allowed the Eastern approach, the Maharishi's approach I'll call it, but of course there are very many societies, cults, manuals, goodness knows what, that tell you how to meditate. Well, I think this is the first thing. Because I think, and I'm not alone here, that actually we all knew how to meditate without being told, without having to sit cross-legged on a sort of puff with a, I'm talking of the pillow rather than the other sort. Excuse me. We actually have that inbuilt facility to sit back and contemplate it, but somehow the pressures of society are on us to not do that. I mean, we should be thought to be in a brown study. I mean, what's he doing? He's sitting looking at the trees, you know. Reflection is something we can all do without recourse to manuals, without recourse to a whole cult, without recourse to the whole sort of gallymorphry, I will call it, to be a bit prejudiced, of ideas that inform the Eastern way of thinking. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, I've got various quotes here. The difference between the Eastern and the Western way of thinking. I'll just read you one, but if you go onto the website, there are so many. It's quite an interesting analysis. What is different in the way someone from the East generally thinks, and what our traditions tell us is the right way to think. I mean, there we are, Christophe Alain, but I mean, he's one out of, I don't know, 100 people you could cite. An alignment of chakras comes more readily to a person of Eastern background when seated without movement, whereas this chakra alignment works to better effect in his Western counterpart when engaged in athletic activity. Now, this is something, we all have this, all of us. We can all sit quietly. I mean, you're listening to me now, but you actually, to each one of you, sitting quietly and working out what it is that will affect your daily life, what it is that you are planning to do in life, how can this be most effectively accomplished? Now, we rush, as a general matter of how we do things. We don't stop to think, we deal with whatever is the problem we have, and on its own level, without stepping back to think carefully about what it is that actually might make our decision-making process rather better. I mean, one of the things that surprised me when I sort of embarked on this great exercise was that reflection is actually taught as an academic discipline. I mean, I'm going to read a little bit more out of what we've got here. I mean, there are it gives one, well, it's the main sort of structural point of how it can reorientate your whole thinking about your life is just something that's very simple. And I'm saying here that if you do something that is as simple as this, but you make a habit of it, and it's not a factor of a hyperpower intelligence or anything like that, it's just a matter of being able to think quietly, examine the options, and take a decision that you can feel confident is actually welled out of what you really need to do, what the situation really requires. And you know what? That sounds like a simple process, but I wonder how many of us actually do this as a matter of habit, because it's a case of getting the right habit. Now let me see if I can just find you one or two quotes from these academics. I mean, I was amazed. I mean, I've got an honorary nephew and he's studying law at Birkbeck College, and he came back saying he had an entire lesson on how to study law reflectively. And I mean, it's not quite the study of law that I once did, but it's actually the methodology of thinking so that you produce, in fact, the right decisions without having rushed on. So there's a chap called, well, there are several people who've thought about what I'm telling you now with a great deal of concern and a great deal of interest. See if I can find it here. If I can't, we'll just have to do it out. We'll just have to go onto the website. Now, in fact, I was almost thinking what we could do is, yes, I was almost thinking, but I think we won't do it, but it would actually somehow make the point that I could stop talking and say, now we're going to have a minute's silence. Now think about it, there's a 2-minute silence on the sort of Day of Remembrance to remember our fallen heroes. Why is there a 2-minute silence? It's actually somehow an idea that has come through that we need quiet spaces to remember and reflect. It's actually a normal thing in a way, but we just haven't, as it were, taken the trouble to sort of inscribe it in the pantheon of the ideas that are important, like meditation with a capital M has been, as it were, accorded. Reflection obviously has advantages. To think quietly about what has happened, what you should remember, has got its own pedigree. But there's a whole pedigree of people who talk about reflection throughout Western culture. And we don't actually stop to compartmentalize it all in one institute. Like I'm doing. And so one of the things about this is there's a certain charm. There are several different rooms in the institute. It's an academic, it's in the ether. It's not an actual institute with bricks and mortar, but it doesn't have to be. It's what actually is going on in the mind. Now I'll just read out one or two little things here so that you see that it's been taken seriously by academics, this idea of reflection. It just hasn't had George Harrison so far, or his type of person, to sort of give it this great zing on the public platform and make it a hip thing. But people become better at using all stages of a learning cycle. This is David Cole, notably including reflecting on experience. They become better lifelong learners and will be more successful. His concept, among many, advocates trial and error, extending to reflection, conceptualization, and experimentation through direct personal experience, and he developed a 4-stage reflective model. Well, this shows you that there is out there, if one cares to study it, which I don't say is essential. It's only if you've got the actual interest in doing it. But it shows you that it's quite a profound way of thinking, reflection. that has been taken seriously by academics. Now, so there's what it can do for you in terms of your attitude to life, how you think about what you're doing, what's happening in the world. It can start to affect you. I mean, we all see on the television all these dramas. Thank God we can get away from tonight for just a few minutes and just think quietly about reflection. But you see what's going on in the world. Well, the attitude of reflection, which I would suggest, but the important thing is that each one of us thinks carefully for themselves. Where I get a kick from looking at the news, and you will tell me when I'm running too long. I am. Yes. All right. Is actually looking at the news bulletins and working out what particular prejudice the newscaster wanted to get across. Now, it's an interesting question, you know, and you find that actually the news becomes much more fascinating when you see why people are producing the items that they are. Now, there are four rooms in the Institute, and one of the charms of reflection, and you bet I'm going to be wound up in a moment, so one of the charms of reflection is it allows you to think, it gives you the excuse, if you need one, that all these fascinating things in the world are not really within the mainstream of what we're doing, or our career, or our goals, but they're fascinating. But this gives you a license. You say, I've got my half an hour to reflect. You've got license. You're giving yourself license to think about all the wonderful things that there are in this life, and you are entitled to do it. This is my half an hour, not a meditation, but a reflection, say, in the morning. And you can have your own space for doing it. There's a whole space, a whole sanctuary for reflection in the Institute there. And I'll end, I think, with a sort of happier note, shall I? I mean, we mustn't be too serious about this. One of the ideas, which I think is quite good really, that they have in India for meditation, to make a session of meditation, sort of go with a Zen, is they advocate starting, can you imagine this, with a great big belly laugh. Someone's got to come along, some comedian, I don't know, Tommy Cooper, I don't know how they find him, or whoever, and make everybody laugh, and that puts everybody in a good frame of mind. Do you know what? It's an interesting point of view, because it brings a perspective down to actually the human level. And you're, with that, with jokes, I'm going to come up with one. It won't be very funny, but it'll give you an idea. You can put your own jokes up afterwards. It gives you an idea that actually some of the things that we take so seriously in life are not quite as important as we like to think. All right, so this is a real hostage to fortune. I don't expect even a titter, but I'm just going to give you an example. I'm taking this from a leaf out of the book of my sainted father, who was a literary agent, and he looked terribly respectable. I don't think I somehow measure up to his sort of a patina of respectability that took an awful lot of people in. But by dint of his looking so respectable, when he's sitting in a restaurant and he's had his sausages or whatever he was having for dinner, you can imagine the reaction of the waiter when this rather sort of respectable, portly gentleman in his 70s, and the waiter is coming to take away the plate. With his thumb and his forefinger, he takes the sausage skin and he waggles it in front of the waiter's eyes, and the waiter looks at him and says, what's going on? And then my father says, please can I have a refill? Now that's the sort of silly remark, if you like, but you start your meeting off with that, and do you know what? You're starting off with a perspective that actually is not quite, whatever we were worried about, as important as we thought. But in another way, it is important. And if one takes the trouble to reflect the good it does for society if you do it en masse, the good it does for you if you do it personally, it's legion. And there's a whole host of ideas that are up there in the Institute that will help you in this way of life to sort of advance. So I commend it as the answer to George Harrison, if nothing else. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Justin. I remember Mike Jackson quite well, and in fact very well. I remember him talking about things at the bottom of his garden on one occasion. I think you underplayed how Anglo-Saxon he would have been, and he wouldn't have given a monkey's hoot.
He was furious.
Yeah, that would be my...
I hate that fucking man, he said. Out in front of me.
Yes, but you said a number of interesting things there. But one towards the end, you talked about titters, which made me think of Ken Dodd. And I met Ken Dodd one evening in the Grand Hotel, the Imperial Hotel Blackpool. He was just finishing a summer season, and the Conservative Party conference was about to start. It was changeover weekend, and he'd had a drink or three. And I said to him, how do you go on stage and just make everybody laugh? He said, you don't try. He had a 7 TPM formula, which was 7 titters per minute. And if you get people for a couple of minutes just tittering, 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 then you say hello and you get your belly laugh. Things to learn from the comedians. But things also to learn, it resonated with me when he said it, reflecting on it, but you've just given it flesh and bones. When Dick Van Dyke was 100, he was interviewed, and they said, what do you put it down to? And he said, to being positive and never being angry. And I think I've added to that then, but you've reinforced it. For God's sake, don't take yourself too seriously. Which takes me back to my old nan, and you were talking about East and West. I gather you were meaning macro East and West, sort of here in China or something. Yeah, something like that. Well, she was the East End, mate. And she used to say to me as a kid, sleep on it. I don't know if anybody else was told as a kid to sleep on it. It's actually fitting into that psychology, isn't it? Absolutely. Let me ask you a question while giving the folk time to think of their own questions. How macro-micro is this East and West? Because the people in Cornwall are a lot more relaxed and thoughtful and reflective than the people in Essex. So, is that...
There's always a problem in generalities, I mean...
Well, Mike Jackson was a general.
Well, that sort of generality is another together, and he was really angry. He did not feed the joke, which I was very surprised at. In fact, I've written about him in this book, which is about what is now your society, David. Well, you can take either, can't you? I'm a great believer in that there's something to be said for almost every point of view. I mean, there's this wonderful story of the hippie who goes and finds a guru on some mountainside, and he says, he's looking very lost, I'm trying to find myself, he says. And the guru turns to him and said, you look pretty damn inscrutable yourself. You can actually come up with this difference of approach. I mean, in the East, they are more interested, as far as I can see in general, in somehow catapulting yourself up into the sort of ether to somehow losing your anchorage in your personality and finding yourself. Whereas actually, reflection, if you want to take a view from the Western approach, we're actually trying to understand ourselves. Now, you can take both ways of doing things. You can take the line that they do in the East, Wei Wu Wei. I don't know if you've heard of Wei Wu Wei, but it's basically allowing whatever is going on to take its course, and it's a sort of serendipity in life, and this is the way the world's going to go. Or you can say, if you're taking the Western line, probably the Essex line, from whatever you're saying, if you're going with the flow, do you know what you're most like? A dead fish. Now, you can actually say that both of these ways of looking at the world hold good. And the thing with all of this, you extrapolate and extract that which is of relevance and meaningful to you.
But the principle of relaxing and reflecting has got to be a good one. And this won't surprise these people. I've never grown up beyond the age of 12. And that's very deliberate, because I worked out probably when I was about 12, the kid of 12 is hacked off, hates his mother, his father, his brother, everybody in life. They wake up the next morning not bringing yesterday into today, and they're bubbly and they're exciting and they're hungry for life again. But by the time you get into that wonderful period of adolescence, you start carrying that resentment forward. And I suspect, listening to you, Justin, that subconsciously, supraconsciously maybe, that going through my head all those years ago, age 12, I was actually reflecting on the day and binning the parts I didn't like. So it's your turn now, folks. Where's the question? Who's reflecting on a good question? Well, you've silenced them. That's never happened before. Andrew.
I find that night time for reflection is in the middle of the night. Now, is that genuine? I mean, that's the time I sort of find myself thinking about problems or what's going to happen or what has happened, or whether I liked it, whether I want to change it. You haven't mentioned night time at all.
Can I ask you a question before Justin comes in on that? How many hours a night do you sleep?
Probably not enough.
Well, again,
yes, but
too many and not enough. We have a matrimonial situation.
I tried for
For somebody who sort of wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning, middle of the night, and never really goes back to sleep because they've slept enough.
Sometimes happens like that.
Yeah, that's not really the middle of the night to them, is it? It's early morning.
I don't think about it like that.
Well, the first thing to say is that's absolutely fine, and it's actually rather delight to hear you say that, because one thing that we're against is unnecessary degree that we all do in so many spheres of codification. Why in the middle of the night, when you have the urge and you feel that still small voice that's silent in all the activity of the day, that's when your genuine feelings will come out to you. And do you know what? I have that as well, by the way. And do you know what? Very often one goes by that feeling which is deep within oneself. I mean, I'll dare to joust with Freud here about conscious and subconscious. I think it's all the same, and it's just what you're talking about there comes from a deeper part within yourself, but because it's a deeper part, it's probably more authentic to you. So yes, that's exactly what we're about here, but to feel that in fact you did it at night time, you know, that wasn't the time to be thinking consciously. No, it was right for you, and that's what matters. Yes.
Alan's going to come in next, but does anybody else wake up in the middle of the night reflecting? Or are you too deep in sleep? Tracy, you... And when either of you reflect, do you feel good about it afterwards, or are you cursing you wish you hadn't? Yeah. Alan?
Right. This is an awkward. I might be on very soft ground here.
We've got tractor.
Yeah, you might need that. If you move from reflection, do you actually come to contemplation? Is there a movement, or is there a line between the two?
That's actually very interesting. There's a whole piece on the Institute about the difference between...
You carry on talking.
The difference between intellectual reflection and ruminative reflection. And there are different sorts of the brain that get involved in this. Now, in case you think I'm being a bit airy-fairy here, another of the things that you actually discover if you go on this journey is how far modern science has looked into the different sort of, you know, cellular movements in the brain and can actually now detect on a screen what sort of reflection you're being involved in. And I would say to you that for me, contemplative reflection is partly what it's all about, and then you can move on to that. It's the base, and then you have, once you've isolated what it is that matters to you, then you bring the other sort of reflection in, and you're thinking carefully. So actually there is a difference if you're going to be specific, but what is so interesting is the degree that difference is manifest in biology. It's extraordinary.
There's been some research in the States recently, but you said just now that everyone approaches these things in a different way and finds out the way it works for them. That's obviously true. But I have 2 baths every day, roughly 20 minutes, and I'm not consciously conscious almost at times. I'm just floating away and everything, and it's lovely. And there's been some research in the States recently, because I've been teased for 70 odd years for doing that, that The best thing you can do before you go to bed at night is to have a tepid bath, because it relaxes you and calms you. The worst thing you can do is have a shower, which is bouncing you with water, stimulating you. So, are we just beginning to learn that with me it's baths, with other people it'll be other things? That we've actually been doing all this naturally, and then life stopped us doing it.
That's quite right what you just said there. This is to some extent, not entirely because there's so many factors involved, this is to some extent a factor of simple confidence. Now, one of the things we say on the Institute about a sanctuary, I mean, I've got a sanctuary, it's a pretty weird thing. We won't go into
You've got a man shed at the bottom of the garden.
No.
I guess I'll have a Catherine about that.
I won't be too sort of, cloak and daggerish about it, because there's a picture on the website, at least it will be when it's properly migrated over. And that's my sanctuary, but I've also got a friend who stays with me regularly, he's a soldier, but he loves sort of electronic equipment, and his sanctuary is actually, you go into his room and it's sort of piled high with radio equipment and all the sort of thing that would sort of terrify me, but to him, he relaxes there. And so the thing in answer to your question is, a sanctuary is any place that you want to regard as a sanctuary. But you should have confidence in it. You should have confidence in your baths, and it's actually a very useful way to get your thoughts in order.
I think you said your baths, but you might have said your bar, and it would do the same thing.
Chacun son goût.
Any more questions, folks? Because I'm just going to reflect on something that you reminded me of. Elmer Dangerfield, who founded the European Atlantic Group in 1954. There's been some phenomenal things in the past, it's not now what it was then. But I remember one dinner where we had the American ambassador to speak in St Ermines, I think, and we were on the gallery as well as downstairs. And somebody who was come from a society that I never knew as a child, went up to Elmer and said, well, it was terribly good speaking, but the food tonight, I didn't think it was particularly good. And Elmer turned and said, we don't come here for the food, we come here for the intellect. And that's something I often reflect on in good company, where perhaps everything else isn't right. And I think you've done that for us tonight. We might not be the largest audience we've had here, but without doubt, having you here has been a bonus and a benefit. Justin, we've learned a lot. Thank you. Now, I'm going to plug something on